The palace gates opened, but what stepped out wasn't a royal carriage, it was a truth that left millions gasping. From behind the fortress walls of Buckingham Palace, a message emerged that would shake the nation to its core. King Charles, the Plea, steadfast monarch who had weathered storms both political and personal, was facing an enemy no title could protect him from his own failing health. Whispers had circulated for months, but today, the rumors hardened into a chilling reality. As cancer quietly ravaged the king's body, the monarchy itself seemed to tremble under the weight of uncertainty. In an official statement that traveled faster than wildfire, King Charles's office announced that Prince William would step into a dramatically expanded role. Not in a ceremonial sense, not in symbolic duties crafted to appease public fascination, but in the raw, grueling work of kingship. Meetings once reserved for the sovereign were now placed firmly into William's hands. State visits, high stakes, diplomacy, confidential strategy sessions, these were no longer distant lessons for a future ruler. They were his burden now. And the burden wasn't just heavy, it was unprecedented. Inside the palace, the atmosphere thickened with fear. Royal insiders, usually tight-lipped and loyal, began leaking troubling reports to trusted journalists. The transition of power, once thought to be decades away, was already being orchestrated behind velvet curtains. It was not an abdication, nor a formal announcement of succession, but it was clear. The monarchy was preparing for the unthinkable, and they were doing it fast. As William accepted his new duties, a subtle shift took place, one that no royal historian could overlook. No longer the dutiful son standing patiently at the side of the throne, William was becoming a monarch in all but name. Every handshake, every speech, every appearance was no longer just practice for the future. It was the present. It was survival. Across the country, television anchors struggled to conceal their disbelief. Social media exploded with speculation and sorrow. What did it mean for the crown if the king's strength was waning? Could William shoulder the ancient institution's burdens before the coronation that destiny had promised him? These were no longer hypothetical questions. They were urgent, and the answers would shape the monarchy's future, perhaps even its survival. Behind closed doors, William bore the gravity of it all with a stoic grace that only heightened the nation's anxiety. He wasn't just stepping into his father's shadow, he was walking straight into history's unforgiving glare. But even as the world leaned in to watch the young prince ascend into a role that demanded more than any royal duty had ever demanded. Before, a different battle raged in the place he called home. Because what William had to face next would not only test his loyalty to the crown, it would break the heart of the woman standing closest to him. As the cameras flashed on William, the king retreated into the shadows, carrying a secret heavier than his crown. Outwardly, King Charles moved with the same poise that had defined his reign, shaking hands, attending ceremonies, offering smiles that barely concealed the growing weight behind them. But inside the palace walls, where no cameras could capture the truth, a different story unfolded. One of a monarch whose body was waging a silent, merciless war against him. His illness, long suspected by the public, was worsening at a pace few dared to acknowledge. Behind the glittering facade of royal life, internal memos spoke of cancelled meetings, shortened appearances, and a man visibly drained of his former resilience. Trusted aides whispered of a king who pushed through the pain for every event, but collapsed into silence the moment the spotlight faded. Despite the grandeur surrounding him, Charles was fighting a battle that had no mercy for titles or thrones. The very institution he had waited his entire life to lead was now slipping through his fingers, just as he had grasped it. It wasn't the first time Charles's private battles had clashed with his public image. Throughout his life, he had worn the dual masks of royal strength and human vulnerability. Whether enduring a loveless marriage under the merciless glare of the press, or grappling with public skepticism in the wake of tragedy, he had learned that duty demanded the sacrifice of self. But never before had the stakes been so high, or the cost so personal. Every passing day blurred the line between public ceremony and private crisis, and even those closest to the crown began to sense that the inevitable could no longer be postponed. Within the palace, whispers grew louder, evolving into serious conversations. The monarchy had to prepare. A shift in leadership was no longer a distant eventuality. to be managed in slow, ceremonial steps. It was a looming reality, pressing down with a force that demanded immediate action, and at the center of those hushed discussions was William. No longer simply the next in line, he was being shaped, molded, tested for a role that might be thrust upon him far sooner than the world was ready to accept. There were lessons being taught now that would never appear in textbooks: how to carry a kingdom on one's back, how to navigate a nation through grief, and how to bear the unbearable without faltering. Behind every polished public event, William was being steeled for a future that was racing toward him. Yet even as he stepped forward under this crushing weight, a heartbreaking decision awaited him, one that Catherine never saw coming. When the EU call came to represent the crown, it was not Charles who answered, it was his son, standing alone against the tide. In a moment that felt more symbolic than strategic, Prince William was chosen to lead Britain's tribute at the funeral of Pope Francis, a gathering of world leaders, spiritual icons, and royalty from across the globe. But this was no ordinary royal appearance. This was a watershed moment, a silent declaration that the heir was no longer waiting in the wings, he was already taking center stage. With King Charles weakened and the throne's future in flux, William's solo journey to Vatican City was more than diplomatic duty. It was the quiet, powerful unveiling of a monarch in waiting stepping into history. The decision came swiftly and without fanfare, yet its weight was undeniable. William would go to Italy alone, and just as striking as his presence was Catherine's absence. For a couple so often seen side by side, this separation sent shockwaves through both the press and public. No official explanation was given, only a confirmation from the palace that the Princess of Wales would remain in the UK. In royal circles, such gaps in protocol are rarely accidental. Behind the scenes, the silence spoke louder than any statement. Many questioned the choice, but the answer lay deep in the folds of royal tradition. For centuries, British monarchs have deliberately refrained from attending papal funerals, a quiet tension that stems from the very foundations of the Church of England. As supreme governor of a church born from a break with Rome, King Charles was bound by a protocol that demanded distance. To preserve religious neutrality and avoid diplomatic entanglements, his absence was necessary. But this left the task and the spotlight entirely on William. And what a spotlight it was! The funeral of Pope Francis was no ordinary event. Held in the Sacred Heart of Vatican City, it drew presidents, kings, and global figures from every continent. All eyes turned to Tite, the man now expected to carry the voice of an ancient monarchy. Every step William took was watched. Every word, every gesture, analyzed. It wasn't just about representing Britain. It was about proving that the future king was ready to lead on a world stage drenched in history, politics, and faith. The pressure could have broken a lesser man. But William, composed and resolute, carried himself with a calm that hinted at the steel beneath the surface. Yet even as he navigated this historic moment alone, his mind was not entirely with the dignitaries and rituals unfolding in Rome. Because back in England, behind closed doors and tearful eyes, something far more personal was unraveling. As William boarded the plane alone, back home in England, a tearful confession would shatter the princess's composure. Behind palace doors, Catherine whispered a painful plea that would never make the headlines until now. In the solitude of her private chambers, far from the polished photographs and orchestrated appearances, the Princess of Wales faced a truth she could no longer outrun. Though the public saw a smiling figure of grace and composure, inside, Catherine was breaking. As William prepared to shoulder the weight of the crown alone in Italy, Catherine made a decision that ripped at her own sense of duty. She would not stand at his side. Not this time. For Catherine, the choice was not made lightly. Every fiber of her being had been trained to uphold the monarchy's image, to embody strength even when her own world trembled. Yet now, between the crushing demands of public expectation, the relentless pace of royal life, and the aching responsibility of motherhood, Catherine found herself on the verge of collapse. The dazzling tiaras and the applause of crowds could not conceal the quiet sorrow that had begun to consume her. Behind every wave and curtsy was a woman fighting battles invisible to the cameras, a woman who, for the first time, had to put her own survival above the facade of perfection. The pressures were mounting faster than anyone outside the palace walls could fathom. Juggling the heavy mantle of future queen, the ceaseless media scrutiny, and the yearning to protect her children from the growing storm had taken a devastating toll. But there was another, darker layer to her withdrawal private health concerns that neither she nor the palace had fully revealed. Though she fought to appear invincible, the reality was grim. The emotional strain was beginning to erode her strength, threatening to pull her under at the very moment her family needed her most. It was in one of these fragile moments that insiders reveal Catherine's heartbreaking confession to William. Tearfully, she apologized for not joining him on the most significant journey of his life so far. With a voice trembling between pride and sorrow, she said the words that would haunt the future king long after he boarded his flight. "Please, forgive me." It wasn't a plea born of weakness. It was an act of unimaginable courage, to admit that even queens in waiting can break. That sometimes love demands standing still while the one you love charges into battle alone. And so, as William stood alone before the world, Catherine stayed behind, cloaked not in royal robes but in silent grief. Yet, while she wept in private, clinging to the hope that her decision would not be seen as betrayal, William's next public move would ignite a storm no one inside the royal walls could contain. As William walked into the Vatican's marble halls, he wasn't just a prince anymore, he was the face of a kingdom trembling with change. Every step echoed with more than reverence. It carried the weight of history, tradition, and a nation's hopes for stability in a future that seemed more uncertain with each passing day. Cameras from around the world captured his every move, his every expression, searching for signs of the man he was becoming. This was not just a ceremonial duty. This was a defining moment, a silent but thunderous proclamation that the transition of power had already begun, even if no crown had officially changed hands. In a sea of presidents, kings, and spiritual leaders, William stood tall, representing not just the monarchy, but an ancient institution that had withstood wars, scandals, and revolutions. And yet, beneath the surface, the contradictions of the moment were impossible to ignore. Tradition dictated that the reigning monarch should abstain from such a gathering, a holdover from centuries-old religious divisions that had once torn Europe apart. But the world had changed. Protocols born in an age of conflict now seemed oddly fragile against the backdrop of global mourning. The symbolism was staggering. The king stayed behind, bound by the past, while the son stepped forward, embracing the present and unknowingly heralding the future. The world noticed. In the solemn air of St. Peter's Basilica, William's composure did not go unnoticed. His words, his solemn gestures, even his silence spoke volumes to those watching from afar. Headlines from London to Sydney proclaimed a new chapter for the Windsors. Social media erupted with admiration. Here, at the heart of a global moment of grief, William did not falter. He carried the dignity of his lineage with the confidence of a man who understood the gravity of the throne awaiting him. Yet, as admiration grew, so did an unspoken question, one that lingered like a shadow behind every article and broadcast. Was he truly ready? It wasn't the kind of readiness measured by public appearances or rehearsed speeches. It was the kind that demanded sacrifice, endurance, and an iron will to navigate the relentless scrutiny, the crushing expectations, the endless demands of a role that stripped away privacy, normalcy, and even, sometimes, humanity. Few could guess the toll this invisible weight was already taking on William's shoulders, and fewer still realized that the burden he now carried was not one he bore alone. Because back in England, hidden from the cameras and the Vatican's marble splendor, a personal storm was brewing, one that had the power to shake the very foundation of the life William had built. But when William returned home, he was greeted not with royal applause, but with a personal challenge that would test the very foundation of his marriage. While the world watched the royal Easter gathering, one family's absence spoke louder than 1,000 royal decrees. As the royal family assembled at Windsor Castle in their polished attire, waving to adoring crowds and presenting a united front, a glaring gap could not be ignored. William and Catherine, along with their children, were nowhere to be seen. The very heart of the monarchy's future was missing from its most symbolic celebration of renewal and tradition. And it wasn't a last-minute oversight or an unavoidable scheduling conflict, it was a deliberate, unspoken statement. one that rattled the gilded walls more than any whispered rumor. Instead of standing among the familiar sea of royal faces, William and Catherine chose a different path. They retreated to the quiet sanctuary of Anmer Hall, their countryside refuge far from the cameras, where the only audience was their children and the comforting embrace of Catherine's parents. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't abandonment. It was something far more radical for a family bound by centuries of duty. It was a stand for survival. For the first time in a long time, William and Catherine put their well-being ahead of royal tradition, and the message was as bold as it was heartbreaking. Royal insiders later revealed that this decision wasn't simply about needing a break or savoring a private Easter. It was a move calculated with painful precision. The cracks beneath their polished public image had grown too wide to ignore. The emotional toll of relentless pressure, of endless expectations weighing down their marriage and their mental health, had reached a dangerous tipping point. By choosing the serenity of Anmer Hall over the spectacle of Windsor, William and Catherine were trying to do something the monarchy has always struggled to allow heal before it was too late. Even their choice of worship carried heavy symbolism. Quietly, without fanfare or photographers, the family attended a small Easter service in Sandringham, slipping past the crowds unnoticed. There were no grand carriages, no formal procession. Instead, it was a simple, human act of faith and family, a return to the roots of what truly mattered. Hot cross buns handed to them as they exited the small church became more than a tradition. They became a reminder that even future kings and queens bleed, break, and pray for mercy. But the countryside could only shield them for so long. Even as William and Catherine found brief comfort in the rolling fields and the laughter of their children, royal insiders whispered uneasily. Distance from the crown may have offered a temporary balm, but it could not erase the fractures that fame and duty had carved deep within. The bond between William and Catherine was being pulled taut, and it was about to snap. As cameras captured her radiant smile behind the palace gates, Catherine was fighting a silent, invisible battle. To the outside world, she remained the picture of grace, perfectly poised, effortlessly warm, a beacon of hope for a monarchy desperate for stability. But away from the flashbulbs and waving crowds, the truth was far more complicated, far more heartbreaking. Every handshake and every smile cost her more than anyone could imagine. Behind the carefully curated image was a woman grappling with an emotional burden that threatened to consume her from within, a burden made heavier by the roles she had no choice but to bear. Future queen, devoted mother, grieving daughter-in-law, and public symbol of an empire's fragile continuity. The weight grew heavier with each passing day. Balancing the relentless expectations of the crown with the raw, unrelenting demands of motherhood was a delicate dance Catherine could no longer perform without cost. Every missed event, every moment she chose her family over royal duty, drew whispers from the press and raised eyebrows from within the palace walls. Following her absence from key royal gatherings, the media scrutiny sharpened, twisting her silence into scandal, her vulnerability into weakness. It was a brutal paradox. The more Catherine tried to preserve her emotional strength behind closed doors, the louder the speculation roared outside them. Insiders spoke of private moments. No camera ever captured moments where the pressure cracked. Her polished exterior, where the woman behind the title shed tears for a life that sometimes felt less like destiny and more like entrapment. There were mornings when she could barely summon the energy to leave her bed, afternoons spent soothing anxious children while burying her own fears, nights haunted by questions no royal handbook could answer. Was she failing the family she loved? Was she failing herself? In a palace built on centuries of unbending tradition, Catherine found herself forced to choose between duty and survival. And neither choice came without pain. Yet it is precisely in this struggle that Catherine's humanity shines brightest. Her silent battle behind the walls of privilege and ceremony made her something even more powerful than a princess. It made her real. It made her a mirror of the millions who have smiled through grief, who have carried expectations they never asked for, who have fought invisible wars beneath public masks. In that silent struggle, Catherine shattered the illusion of royal invincibility and, unknowingly, breathed new life into the ancient institution she had once seemed destined merely to uphold. But just when it seemed the cracks might break, the pile family apart. A powerful public moment would remind everyone royal blood runs thicker than scandal. Before the cameras, they stood united, but away from the flashbulbs. Healing would take more than appearances. It would take courage. William and Catherine, side by side once again, smiled and waved as though the storm had never touched them. To the watching world, they were the embodiment of poise and perseverance, their bond seemingly unshaken by the pressures that had nearly splintered it. Yet behind those composed smiles was a truth far more complicated. Reconciliation is not achieved by standing in formation. It is built slowly and painfully, in the quiet moments far from the public's approving gaze. Their next public appearances told a story without words. William's hand resting gently at Catherine's back. Catherine's fleeting glance toward her husband, a glance filled with more than affection. It carried relief, gratitude, and the silent acknowledgement of battles fought in private. It was a subtle but unmistakable message to the world. The heir and his consort were still standing, not because they were untouched by hardship, but because they had chosen each other again and again, even when the easy thing would have been to walk away. History had taught them well. The royal family is no stranger to scandal, nor to the devastating impact of public exposure on private wounds. From Edward VIII's abdication to the painful unraveling of Charles and Diana, the monarchy had long been a battleground where personal anguish collided with national duty. William and Catherine knew the dangers of letting fractures fester beneath the surface. They knew that healing in public demanded more than managing optics. It demanded the quiet rebuilding of trust, far from the stages and ceremonies where their every move was dissected. The emotional cost of the crown had never been clearer. To be the future king and queen was to sacrifice not just privacy, but often peace itself. It meant living every triumph and every failure under a microscope, with little room for error and even less room for weakness. Yet, it was in this crucible that their strength revealed itself not as a polished facade, but as a stubborn, deliberate choice to endure together. The future loomed larger than ever. William's role would only continue to expand, his voice growing louder in matters once reserved for his father. Catherine's evolution was just as critical. No longer merely a supporting figure, she would become a symbol of resilience, a bridge between a wounded past and a hope-filled future. Together, they would have to navigate a kingdom poised on the edge of transformation, a nation watching, waiting, needing something real to believe in. As the world watches, one thing is certain. The next chapter for William and Catherine will be written not in gilded halls, but in the quiet, stubborn resilience of the heart. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.